Welcome once again to another lesson on the Yalak Emet channel, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, as I am rethinking the Torah, and today is January 3rd, 2021. My lesson today is for both the New Testament is Fake series and the Africa of God series, as this lesson touches on both series. My lesson is titled The Isaiah 53 Messiah. The Isaiah 53 Messiah. In Isaiah chapter 53, we have been taught that this wounded character is Jesus Christ. But I'm showing here that this Isaiah 53 is talking about Africa and the Africans being the wounded and the Messiah. So Africa is the Messiah. And again, we know that once Africa rises, it's more hope all across the earth for blacks. So if you don't think that is some kind of a Messiah picture right there in your mind when you hear that, you are in denial. Now, Isaiah 53 and verse 7, and I'm going to come back to Isaiah 53 later, close to the end. But Isaiah 53 verse 7 says, He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. Now this verse, just by itself, without going through the rest of the chapter, speaks powerfully of Africa being the Messiah and not Jesus Christ from the New Testament. So if anyone is teaching you about salvation in Jesus and salvation through Calvary in your church or your camp or any group or a home Bible study and so on, it is all incorrect. The Messiah in Scripture is Africa. He was oppressed, and they say, yeah, Jesus was oppressed. Africa has gone through longer oppression than Jesus did for his 33 and a half years. And once he hit the cross, the other 3.5 years or so that he lived there wasn't really any oppression right there. He had it easy after that. And we know blacks have been going through oppression for a mighty long time. We say even 400 years, but we know this thing has been going on. We've been attacked in our different groups where we lived and set up life in different parts of the earth for way more than just 400 years. But he was oppressed and afflicted, and he opened not his mouth, and brought as a lamb to the slaughter. And he acted like he was dumb. Now, you who went to college or university and you learned the history of blacks and the history of Egypt and so on, and you whether you went to university or you just studied on your own and learned it on your own, and the ancient Egyptians were blacks, they were Africans, they were Cushites and so on, and they came from different parts of Africa and India. So they came together and they were black. So you know it, and you open your mouth, you speak about it, you tell people, you make videos online, you make posts online about it and so on. You're opening your mouth and saying that about the greatness of what we did and what we built and so on. But you notice that it's us who say that at this lower level. But you notice that the African leaders, they don't give one voice to Africa and just start pushing in a crazy way. We were the ancient Egyptians, they were African, we are the blacks, and we are their children and so on. They don't talk like that from a political standpoint and pushing it like that to the world powers. I'm not saying one or two of them may not have said it on their own while talking about something, but they don't make some formal push to say Africa is saying, this is our history, in a big, major kind of way, like they're ready to go to war over it and so on. So what? They are keeping themselves with their mouths closed. So they're dumb, like it says here in verse 7, as a sheep before his shearers is dumb. He openeth not his mouth. Why? He's just keeping his mouth closed. This is talking about Africa, not Jesus Christ, who went to Calvary in the New Testament. And we know, of course, Africa was afflicted. Now they're trying to get the blacks to come back home. Africa was afflicted. You say you need your reparations because you were put into slavery and so on. Africa suffered a lot too because her children were ripped away from her. Parts of her body was damaged. So Africa was oppressed and afflicted. Some afflicted there in Africa and some afflicted all over the world, in the different places where they took us and where they found us, who they did not take because we'd gone there and set up life there for thousands of years before the oppressors came. So Africa is the Israel in the Torah, Israfrica as I call it, or Isra Africa. And Africa is now pushing for the uniting of all African countries to make the United States of Africa. That's like, it sounds like USA, right, that we're used to with America. But basically, Africa is starting to be on the rise. They're going to make the United States of Africa. So the USA is going down over the West here, and the USA is rising up over that side of the world. So basically, USA is taking over USA slowly, in time. And they're also, in addition to pushing for one country, they're pushing for one language. They mentioned Swahili, a Bantu language. Now, sometimes when people are changing things, they can set up stuff and then later on they change it again to fine-tune it. So we don't know if they'll keep Swahili all the time or if they'll switch later on after we fully set up and choose another language. We don't know. I don't know that. Like, some reason that keeps popping into my mind. Because the reason why I say that is because sometimes with the still colonial powers that are around, you can't always push for the final end point that you want because it might cause too much problems. So you might go for something else that still gets you what you want, and later on, when you are 100% in the clear, then you might really do fully what you want. But in any case, they talked about Swahili as the language for Africa, and already they're starting to push that with the schools, right? They're hitting that heavily now. So look at Zephaniah 3:9 that we always said was Hebrew. In this case, it could be Swahili. Zephaniah 3:9, for then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. You see, because Africa is Israfrica. It is the Israel of the Bible, the Israel. It is the Israel people of ancient times. Now, we are told that Jesus Christ from the New Testament is the Son of God. But obviously, if you are starting to see that the Africa that we know is the Israel in the Bible, and they're keeping their mouth dumb like a sheep before the shears is dumb and so on, openeth out his mouth. You're starting to get that now with the other lessons I've been teaching slowly on this matter, that Africa is the Son. And so the Africans, we are the children of the Most High. So look at it now, because this Jesus thing is wrong. Exodus 4:22, and thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Israel is my son. So once you understand more of what I teach and the other lessons to come in this Africa of God series, you're going to see more that Israel is the son in the scriptures. And it also says, even my firstborn. The firstborn because they were the first with God, because don't we say white people came after blacks? So the blacks are the firstborn on earth. That don't mean firstborn to you? So the blacks are the firstborn on earth. That don't mean firstborn to you? Of course it does. They're the firstborn. Even the Bible that we're fighting over and teaching from and so on, Africa had it first because they wrote it. We don't know how it got into this modern stage. Some say they do, some say they don't. They're fighting over it and so on. But we know the original writings were from African spiritual teachings. African stuff, right? So again, there's a firstborn of the Bible, or the firstborn of spiritual documentation. Again, it rests with Africa, with Egypt, the later kingdom, and the earlier kingdoms that were there before, and whatever else was the history of earth. Africa is the firstborn. Africa is the son of God in the scriptures and the prophets. They spoke from their mouths of Africa, not Jesus Christ. Not Jesus Christ. So Africans are going to be freed in the end times to be the son that is let go. As he was fighting with Pharaoh and saying, let my son go. And so Africa is the son of God that will be let go in the end times to realize their full potential and to bring righteousness on the earth. Let's run over now to Isaiah chapter 63 and verse 16. It says here, "Doubtless thou art our father, though Abraham be ignorant of us, and Israel acknowledge us not. Thou, O Lord, art our Father, our Redeemer. Thy name is from everlasting." How could the prophet say Abraham was ignorant? Shouldn't there have been knowledge and clarity and revelation from God to the ancient ones, the patriarchs? Because they're the ones who Israel was built on. Without them, you wouldn't have the Israel the way it was, because it's their children that ended up bringing the 12 tribes and so on, right? And all the other teachings and so on. But it's coming to me now that they are sure in the later stages, because this is Isaiah speaking, that God is their father. But the earlier person, Abraham, a patriarch, he did not have all kinds of surety. He had some amount of ignorance in all of this. So they said, "We are sure, we have no doubt you are our father, even though Abraham was ignorant of us." Why? Because Abraham did not display in the scriptures in a very clear way, like I can see now clearly that the prophets are speaking of Africa. It was not so clear to just read Abraham's life alone and figure that out. But when I get to the prophets that come later on, it can be clearly seen that Africa is the son of God and is the Israel in the Bible. But Abraham did not mention things so strongly to let you see by his own life alone and by his own mouth alone that Africa was actually Israel. But I could read Isaiah alone and see, without reading anything from Abraham and other people, that Isaiah was talking about Africa. And then from there on, I can pull in other people. And so Isaiah looks to me to be probably the most powerful prophet in the entire Torah. That's what it's coming around to me to be. Now, Jeremiah is bad. I've been looking at Jeremiah lately. And I really like Samuel. But Isaiah, like Samuel, certain things he says are really powerful as well. But Isaiah carries his power from chapter 1 all the way to the very last chapter of Isaiah, chapter 66. Isaiah does not take a break. Isaiah hits truth strongly, heavily. And he deals with some natural stuff and wars and so on, but he gets deep into spirituality. He does not allow his discussions of war and judgment and so on to take away from spirituality and revelation that can come to people throughout the entire book that bears his name. Isaiah is very, very powerful. And so when I hear him say something like Abraham was ignorant, I would have to understand that he's trying to communicate that Abraham was not aware, or did not point out, at least. Sometimes you want to, when you're teaching, you try to hide something for different reasons. Like maybe you might anger someone, or people just aren't ready for it, so you don't mention it. So Abraham seems ignorant in that way because he doesn't display that information outright for you to see it. Abraham doesn't just put that information out there that easily. So he says Abraham is ignorant of all of this stuff. and Israel does not acknowledge us. Because Israel in the Bible, they don't come out fully and just let you know that we are Africans or we are the Cushites and so on. They don't tell you it like that. But they could have at least given you more indication that that's what was in their mind that they didn't want to say for some reason by giving many hints like Isaiah did. So with Isaiah, you can put the pieces together and solve the puzzle. But other prophets, they shied away from that. They told you some strong truths, but they still acted ignorant and carried on without properly acknowledging that Israel is actually Africa, and that the inhabitants of the land of Israel were the inhabitants of Africa in their different countries, going under different names. So he repeats it again, and Israel acknowledge us not. The same way we're seeing here now in modern times, you got Hebrew Israelites teaching that they are Hebrews, they are Israelites, but they do not acknowledge that Africa is Israel, and that the African is the Israelite in the Bible and the Israelite today. The Africans, they don't acknowledge that even in your camp today, your modern day Hebrew setting. So we see the powerful prophet again. He is hitting everything like Isaiah does not let up. He does not let up. And maybe that's just a blessing from the Most High, because he pushed strongly for the idea of God to be central in the mind of the believer and of the child of God. When he hits it so much that I am God, I am the Lord, I am the Lord. Isaiah doesn't give you a break from that for too long. He keeps hitting that throughout his book. So the modern Israelite does not acknowledge Africa as being Israel. They call them Hamites. So we see the prophet here is correct again. Abraham is ignorant of this, and Israel acknowledges not, even in 2020 and 2021. But then he repeats, thou, O Lord, art our Father. So he starts out in the verse saying, thou art our Father. And after he gets to all of that ignorance and unbelief and the hiding of the information, he repeats it again to rivet it in, because I said Isaiah does not let up throughout his book. He pushes it in, because he knows there will come times when many lies will be out there. So every chance he gets, he pushes truth right into you. So he repeats it again, even though they don't acknowledge and they're ignorant and so on. He repeats it again saying, thou art our Father. And with a term of endearment, he puts the O on it and says, O Lord, like he's loving the Lord. Thou art our Father, our Redeemer. Thy name is from everlasting. So Isaiah is clearly showing here that the reason why we are saying we are somebody else and not the African, and people are coming up with all kinds of America is the promised land and America this and that and whatever. These people are out to lunch, and I don't know history that well, but I can just see from the prophets, from the Torah, that those teachings are just deception. And I never planned to get into that because I don't know the geography and history very well to tackle that stuff and the history, like I said. But from the prophets, I'm going to have to address it in lessons to come. Not to deal with it directly, but by talking about Africa, it will expose that doctrine of America. Because I told already, like the greats that have researched and stuff, Africans came to the Americas thousands of years ago. And that's how it got populated. And I like the way that General Setir Sarasudin said it long time ago. Until the African went down the river, there was no one down the river. See, that's just a nice statement the way he put it. So until we came to America, there was no America. There was no one known as an American. Why? Because it's the African who came to the Americas. So if you are an Israelite and you left Israel and you came to the Americas, and oppressors come and put you into 400-year slavery and so on, you are still Israelite. So if you were African and came to the Americas, you are still an African. You are still a child of Africa. That's why now Africa is saying, come back home, we need you, come back home. Why? Because after you've been gone so long, they still know you are African. because they know the history. But they've kept their mouth shut and didn't say, come back home too tough, because they kept their mouth shut, acting dumb as a sheep before the shearers. Like Isaiah 53:7 said earlier. But now they're starting to open up their mouth because the time is drawing close when redemption draweth nigh, like a song I remember from the Christian church. So the Hebrew Israelites today, they acknowledge Israel instead of acknowledging the land of Africa. They are not sure that both are the same. Israel is Africa. And a lot of ancient writings are like that, spiritual writings, even when you go into the Vedic writings and all kinds of other stuff out there, they describe certain things as something else. Sometimes a god could be described as a tree that's tall and strong and doesn't go down with strong winds or storms, right? Because the tree is strong and it is lasting and it can even provide food and so on and shelter and stuff like that. So it's long lasting and powerful to withstand the elements when the elements rise up more than normal and so on. So it might be treated or described as being a god. It's long lasting and powerful. So I don't have a problem seeing Israel talked about, even though it is actually Africa, but they're not just spelling it out in plain words. I don't know why they did it like that, but or who did it, said like that in modern times or from originally. But obviously, you're still getting the truth right here. Now, Isaiah, I got two more scriptures to read now. Isaiah 53, and then I'm going to come back to this chapter, Isaiah 63, to close it out. So let's run now to Isaiah 53, verse 1 to 3. As I'm speaking here in the New Testament is Fake series on the Africa of God series, that the Isaiah 53 Messiah is about Africa. That Messiah is Africa. So Isaiah 53, 1 to 3. Who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Who's believing this when I say that Israel in the Bible is Africa? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. See, tender and delicate, because we know when the oppressor came and ransacked Africa, took some of us away on slave ships and so on, we became very, 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 very tender. And, we could just break further at any moment because we were destroyed. We were ransacked and weakened. But he still in this weakened state grew as a root out of a dry ground. Not well fertile soil, but dry ground. Why was he still able to grow out of dry ground? Because he is the Son of God, and God will not leave his soul in hell. Check David for that one. It's not Jesus. So, why was he able to grow out of a dry ground? It is because he is the Son of God. He is God's Son. And since they ransacked Africa, the oppressor, and left the Son of God for dead, Africa for dead, didn't think we would rise again after all that, and still have Gog Magog left. They don't think we will survive. They thrust us into hell. But the Son of God, Africa, still came up as a root out of a dry ground, the dryness of all of that. Why? Because he won't be left dead in hell. Because thou shalt not suffer thy Holy One to see corruption. He's not going to leave his soul in hell. Africa will not be left there to see corruption. So check David for that, because that is not speaking about Jesus Christ from the New Testament getting up out of the tomb after some supposed 3 days and coming back to life. That does not fulfill in Jesus. It is being fulfilled before your eyes in Africa today, because Africa is the Son of God, is the Messiah of God upon the earth. And when righteousness hits the world all over, it will be because Africa reached its zenith and can enforce and spread the righteousness of the Creator all across the earth, like we did in earlier times we were teaching righteousness, all these pharaonic writings and so on and whatever, they were teaching righteousness and how to live well on the earth. Because Africa is the son of God, is the son of righteousness. So as a root out of dry ground, he hath no form nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. And isn't that the way it really played out in life? Because when I was a child, all I knew of Africa that they showed me on my little black and white TV at first when I was young in Jamaica was that Africans were just running around naked and sleeping in huts and so on, and throwing spears at everybody all the time and throwing spears at animals and so on, left, right, and center. But now that I've grown up, I see many places in Africa, not just Nigeria, but many places, look like some metropolitan city that you'll see in America or any place else on earth that's built up. But they showed us the places that were broken down, that the prophet says will be built up, the old waste places. Because Israel is Africa, the old waste places there. They showed us all that stuff. And quickly, some people are saying it's the Americas, these places in the Americas will need to be built up again because they're desolate, like the Bible says. But you have to check it, because the prophecy says the old waste places will be built up, but it still shows that people were still living there. So some of these places, people are saying, oh, the civilization there has been wiped out and it's going to be rebuilt because this is the land of the Lord over here in the Americas. No, people are supposed to still be living there, because Gog Magog is coming after Israel or Africa. I should have saved that for another video. But if they're coming, they have to come after the people there to fight, which means the people will still be in the land that's broken down and still needs to be built up, the waste places. So obviously, if they've still been living there, they're going to still have some new structures there. And keep in mind that when you see the captivities in the Old Testament of Israel being taken into captivity, people were still left in the land. When I was younger, I thought everybody really left the land in slavery. But there were still people left, like they left the peasants and so on. So people were still there. There is no beauty that we should desire him. When I was younger, they were saying Jesus didn't look all that cute. But that's not what it's talking about. They showed us no beauty about Africa. They showed us the old broken up places with no grass, dry dust and all that, blowing all the time, and some old buildings made of stone. And you have some mystery how they built that stuff with all the stones. But that's what they showed. They didn't want to show us the high rises and the towering buildings and so on, and the nicely paved roads and technology and so on that's there. They didn't want to show us that because they just wanted to see no beauty. So it says there is no beauty that we should desire him, because they painted the picture for us here in the West, that there is nothing beautiful about Africa that we should desire. Keep your mind off Africa. Keep living here in the West with all the European countries, while they were slowly planning on taking over Africa completely. There's no beauty about Africa, so they showed us dumb stuff about Africa. Now we see it's a lie. Verse 3, he is despised and rejected of men. Isn't that what happened to the Son of God, Israel? They were despised. Even we, the blacks, despised it because we were taught to despise. He is despised and rejected of men because we were taught that way, to despise and reject it. We don't want to go to Africa to be running around with a spear in our hand every day, hunting our own food and so on, and be backward. But that's just how we were taught, but it's not the truth. He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. And didn't we do that? We look towards going to heaven as a Christian. We look toward Jerusalem and going to Israel as Hebrew Israelites. But we hid our faces from looking at Africa and from saying we want to go to Africa. We hid our faces from that. So Africa was despised, and we esteemed him not. And when you look at the story of Jesus, he wanted people to come to him. And they have the song, Come to Me, Meek and Lowly, or whatever it said from the Christian church. But he wanted them to come to him, Jesus. Because if you don't come, you can't get saved. You have to accept him. And so at one point he said about Jerusalem, I would have gathered you like a hen gathers her chick, or something like that. But you would not. You wouldn't come to me. So if you come to the Messiah, you can get saved. If we come to Africa, we can get saved. That's what it's saying. You have to come to the knowledge first in your mind, because Africa is the Messiah. If you don't come to the Messiah, acknowledge the Messiah, you don't got no salvation. But if you come and acknowledge the Messiah, you can be saved. Now, the last chapter now, run back to Isaiah chapter 63, and I'll read two verses here. Isaiah 63, verse 18 to 19. The people of thy holiness have possessed it but a little while. Our adversaries have trodden down thy sanctuary. And we know the great sanctuaries that were there in ancient times in Africa, they are gone. All the places where they taught the spiritual mysteries of the universe, it's gone from us. We don't know. They burned lots of books, they stole others, and so on. All that stuff is gone from us. But it will return. Because the people who carry the ancient knowledge, they're still on earth. And the ones you hear talking and coming out, you're like, oh, I didn't know this person was alive. They aren't even the main ones, because the real ones will not come out. I found the scriptures. It's for another lesson that tells you that they're still around. But I'll bring it out some other time. So they have trodden down thy sanctuary. Verse 19, we are thine. Thou never bearest rule over them. They were not called by thy name. But you hear what it says? He's basically letting you know that they are the people of his holiness, and that others were not called by thy name. Africa is called, or Israfrica is called by the name of the Lord. And doesn't the scripture say that salvation is in the name of the Lord? And David said, I will look unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. And he will look toward the tower. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. And it's through that name that you can be saved. So if Africa is telling you others were not called by the name, they're telling you we are called by the name of the Lord. So Africa comes in the name of the Lord. Isaiah 53, Messiah, is about Africa. Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, Yalak Emmett channel.